Good evening all, and welcome. Today I want to celebrate another fantastic narrator, who I think is very underrated and worthy of your attention. Prepare yourself for the master that is Mr. Davis, as we let the darkness take control.
Back in July of 2016, I ended up homeless and living out of my car, and in an attempt to make the best out of the bad situation, I decided to take my savings and travel across the country. I didn't find a place until late December, so I have quite a few stories of weird shit happening during the 6-ish months I was rolling around in absolute solitude. The creepiest thing, though, would probably be the day I spent in central Nevada. Nevada State Route 375 is a desolate stretch of land, flat and sandy save for the scrub bushes and the 300,000 head of cattle meandering through the 220-mile stretch of open rangeland. On either side of the road, at a distance that feels close but isn't, stand plateaued mountains as barren as the land itself, the walls of racetrack long forgotten. The road is famous in certain circles for its affectionate nickname, the Extraterrestrial Highway, brought about because of its function as the only major road near Area 51. And aside from the 54-person town just as many miles in, it's empty. After waking up in a gas station in Las Vegas, I powered north along Highway 93, a barren but not necessarily uninhabited road, high on the promise of adventure. I'm from a large city on the East Coast, so places like that, places where there's almost nothing but nature, are absolutely breathtaking to me. I saw a few cars, a few houses, and a few trees, so 93 seemed like a normal back road, and I expected 375 to be the same. Only when I got to the junction of the two did I realize things weren't going to be entirely what I expected. The first thing I saw was a large metal building, almost like a small plane hangar up on the hill, with what looked like a poorly made statue of an alien standing by the main door. It was one of those campy tourist attractions, and there was no way I could leave without some kind of souvenir, so I pulled into the level dirt area at the base of the hill and parked. There wasn't a path to the building though, so I climbed my way up the steep pile of sand on my hands and knees. Chalking it up to part of the experience, and went inside. Despite the fact that the door was open, the place was dark and empty. I wandered around for a little, looking at rows of campy t-shirts, eventually running into the restroom and back, a little disappointed and more than a little creeped out. By the time I left, empty-handed save for a small pamphlet about the area that had been marked free, it was a little before 11. I kept driving, only then realizing how desolate 375 was compared to any other road I'd been on. I saw a few live cows and the occasional carcass, but other than that, there was absolutely nothing. No trees, no people, no buildings, no grass, as far as the eye could see. It was the first time I'd ever been in anything that could truly be considered a desert. The map on the back of the brochure wasn't much of a map at all. It was a black line that was supposed to signify 375, and a red dot some ways to the east of that was apparently Area 51. After about half an hour, I came to a spot that looked like a sandy turnaround on the side of the road with a bent stop sign facing out randomly into the desert. I figured this had to be it. So, against all better judgment, I turned my silver VW sedan off the paved highway and drove. And drove. There were no signs, just me driving across the open desert towards something I wasn't even sure even actually existed. I realized then that I had no cell service and probably hadn't for quite some time. If I got a flat tire, ran out of gas, or got lost, I would have no way to call for help. But because I had come that far, I decided to just keep going. Some intermediate amount of time later, I came across a crumbling farmhouse, barn, wooden building, smack in the middle of nowhere, and decided at least that I was headed in the right direction. There was one sign, an ominous looking wooden arrow painted bright neon green, the kind of color you usually associate with little green men, so I kept going. Reaching the entrance to Area 51 was just as startling as it was anticlimactic. It was in a desert far, far away from rockable walls, and then suddenly the base of the mountain was right in front of me. There was a barbed wire coil on the ground and a sign that said, Air Force property. No trespassing, no drones, no photography, or something like that right on the edge, with nothing discernible on the other side. Being the wild, rebellious kid I am, I took pictures anyway. This is where it starts to get kind of weird. I'd done what I could do, so I turned my car around and headed back to the direction I came. It was important to note that on my way to Area 51, I traveled in a straight line. And going back toward the main road, I also traveled in a straight line. Yet somehow, after another length of intermediate time, I never came across that farmhouse again. The panic started to set in because I couldn't see the road in the distance, and I couldn't see that crumbling building in any direction. So I drove faster than I probably should have across the rough desert. In an effort of keeping myself from getting a flat or losing control of the car, I turned on cruise control, but it kept cutting out for some reason, and my car would roll to a complete stop if I wasn't paying attention. I spent the better part of however long I was out there freaking the fuck out because I wasn't sure if I was going in the right direction. The sun hadn't seemed to move across the sky at all. I had no way to tell if I was going west or northwest or southwest or whatever. I never saw that building again. And when I finally made it back to 375, I was on a different portion of the road than the one I'd initially turned off of. No stop sign, no turnaround, just cracked pavement. I decided to keep going along 375 in hopes of finding that the town I knew was there and happened to glance at the clock in my car. I thought I'd been keeping track of how long I'd been in the desert, looking down every few seconds, and the lack of solar movement had me convinced I'd been on the main road for maybe an hour at most. Except it was nearly 3 o'clock. I had almost spent 4 hours searching for Area 51 and then making my way back, and had absolutely no idea that much time had passed. The entire experience was surreal. I never actually found the town that was supposedly out there. Just a bar where I stopped to fill up my gallon jugs of water. There were 3 people inside, no cars in the parking lot, and according to the bartender, no other buildings for 110 miles. I didn't bother fact-checking or asking about Rachel, Nevada. She told me that I'd die out there in the desert if I didn't have a tank full of gas, and that even if I did, I'd probably die anyway because the roads weren't maintained and the cattle had a tendency to collapse in the middle of the highway and rot there. A hazard. I thanked her and got in my car and turned the fuck around. By the time I hit Highway 93, I was driving well over 118 miles per hour, convinced that there was something more to the overwhelming emptiness of this place, and that it would follow me back to the interstate. I still have so many questions about everything that happened that day. Why did I end up at a different part of the road than I'd started? How the hell did 4 hours pass without me noticing? Where did the people in the bar come from? Why was there a bar out there in the first place? What was that first metal building I'd came across, and why was it open but empty? It was an irrational, unfounded fear, likely born from the fact that, as a city girl, I've never been anywhere so desolate. But damn if that shit wasn't genuinely creepy as hell. I'm currently a 26-year-old female. This story takes place when I was in my early teens. I was home alone once again. The time was night. My parents really got into the party scene before their separation, so the story takes place before the others. Anyway, I was in our basement on our desktop. Yeah, this was before laptops and iPhones. I was chatting with my friends on AOL, listening to music. It was getting late, not a lot of people were on, so I decided to head up to bed. Now, to paint a picture of my house. Where I was sitting, I would have been facing the front of my house. There's a window to my back that leads out into our back porch. The porch is a 3-level one. The ground level, the pool level, which is where the window sits perfectly, and finally the top level that leads to the door to our kitchen. I slowly made my way to the basement stairs and climbed up them half asleep. I was nearing the top when I heard someone sprinting up the stairs to the top level of our back porch. I froze in fear at the top of the stairs. I love horror movies and always yell at the actors when they go to investigate a noise, so what did I do? Became those stupid actors in the movies. I slowly turned the corner to go into my kitchen and was facing the door that led to the porch. The door had a decent sized window on it. The lights were on in the kitchen, so whoever was out there could see me, but I could not see them. I began moving towards the door. I got halfway when I heard footsteps sprinting down the stairs. Without thinking, I ran to the door, thrusted it open while turning on the back porch light. Nothing. Whoever had been out there was able to get away before I had a chance to see them. I had been at that desktop for a long time that night, so who knows how long this sicko watched me. Whoever you are, I don't think I'd want to meet you, although I still want to know who you are. 1. I was babysit by a neighbor who had a daughter in the same grade as me. Her and I had become good friends and had sleepovers when we were little. By the time of this story, I was just old enough to stay home by myself and no longer needed to be babysat. My friend's mom was the one who mainly had babysat me, and I liked her, but my friend's dad was kind of weird and annoyed me. He would always pick on me and was just plain creepy. I was glad to finally be able to stay at home and be away from him, but his daughter and I were still good friends, and our parents were good friends as well. One day I'd gotten home after school and was home alone. I realized that my friend had borrowed my one book that I needed for a class assignment. She only lived in the next neighborhood over, so I called over to her house. This was before cell phones were really popular. My friend's dad answered, and I asked to speak with my friend, but he said that she wasn't home. I asked if my book was over there, and he said that he'd seen it downstairs. I asked if I could walk over and get the book. He agreed, and I hung up and began my journey over there. When I got there, I went around to the back door like I normally always did. I walked in and yelled out that I was here for my book. It was very quiet. I saw my book on the table and went to retrieve it. That's when my friend's dad came out from where the washer and dryer were, completely naked. I was shocked. He reacted as though I had caught him off guard, and I just left after that. I thought at the time maybe he didn't hear me. Later, I realized that he planned it. I mean, I had called him to tell him I was coming over. I yelled when I got there. I'm just glad nothing else happened. Yet. 2. So a few years after this incident happened, I had another scare with my friend's dad. I was around 14. I had been home alone all day. It must have been a holiday or something because it was during the school year, but I had the day off. My dad was at work and my parents had recently separated, so my mom had moved out. I was in the kitchen and was being a nerd by playing Sudoku. It was nice outside, but I hated going out there alone. I was startled by someone opening up our downstairs door. I heard someone yell to me. Realizing it was my friend's dad, I went to the stairs leading to our downstairs. There's no door for the stairs. My dad had built them in the middle of the house, so we wouldn't have to go out into the garage to get down to the basement. My friend's dad was standing there. "Hey, I didn't want to scare you. I just came over to try out the new hot tub. Your dad said I could get in whenever." It was true. We had just gotten a new hot tub, so I didn't think it was all that weird. I just said, okay, and returned to playing my Sudoku game. A little while later, I hear him yell for me again. "Heather, could you get me a towel? I dropped mine in the hot tub." I, of course, said yes and got up to go get the towel. As I passed the stairs to get to the bathroom, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but continued to the bathroom without hesitation. As I opened the closet door, it blocked the door that led into the bathroom, a stupid constructed flaw. Now, as I closed the closet door, there he stood. I hadn't even heard him walk up, and again, he was completely naked. I freaked out. I half threw the towel at him at the same time and moved around him to get out of the bathroom and back into my place in the kitchen. I just resumed playing Sudoku and not knowing what else to do. This grown man was in my house, the place I thought I'd be safest. He walked over to me with a towel on, thankfully. He started asking me about my game and wanted me to explain how it worked. I gave him short, quick answers. My mind was racing with fear. He then turned the conversation to how it was okay that I saw him and trying to make the situation sound like it was perfectly normal. I barely spoke to him and never once looked at him the entire time he talked. I think he finally saw how terrified I was and finally he left. The moment he was out the door, I picked up the phone and called my then boyfriend. I told him everything that happened and how freaked out I was. Then I saw my friend's dad's car drive back to the backside of my house. He came to the door again. I reluctantly answered and he immediately saw the phone in my hand. He stated that he left something out back and was just coming to get it. I said okay and shut the door. Today I wonder if he was coming back to finish what he had started. When my dad returned home that day, I told him everything that had happened. He was enraged and went outside to call my friend's dad. I didn't get to hear anything he said, but he told me that my friend's dad was no longer allowed near me or the house. He also asked if I wanted to press charges, but I stupidly rejected. Looking back, I wish I would have pressed charges then and there. 3. So after I told my dad about what had happened, he went around the neighborhood to the families with kids that were my age and that used to be babysat by my friend's mom. He was warning them of what happened. A little while later, a friend of mine a few houses down, we'll call Kay, came down to tell me that she had the experience with the same guy. Kay had been home alone one night when he showed up half drunk to her house. He was talking with her and explained that he was out for a walk. Weird because it was really late at night. This was before he had ruined my childhood forever, so she was unaware of his intentions. As they were talking, he came up behind her and started rubbing her shoulders. He was also pretty much right up against her. She was freaking out on the inside and didn't know much about how to get away from him. Luckily, since he'd been drinking so much, he asked to use the restroom. As he went to the restroom, she called her neighbor to come over. Even though it was late at night, the neighbor knew something was wrong and came right over. When the guy came out of the restroom, he saw that Kay and her neighbor were talking in the living room. The other person, who was a male, must have alarmed the guy, so he thanked her for letting him use the restroom and he left. She too told her parents. Her parents were upset, and although it freaked her out, it wasn't something they could really report. My friendship ended with this guy's daughter after these incidents. Kay and I do wonder if he might have ever tried anything with his own daughter. The fact that he seemed to try with us and that she never once had a single boyfriend or girlfriend growing up, and she seemed to be more of a loner, but that could also be due to what her father had done to us. I do feel bad that I stopped talking to her, but I'm still terrified of him today. I went on to major in criminal justice, and through some classes realized that he was showing signs of starting to groom me to be his victim. I guess he never thought I'd tell since I was a very shy and quiet girl. When I was in high school, I had a habit of taking power naps while everyone was having lunch. I'd curl up in a quiet part of the hallway, pull my jacket over my face, and sleep for maybe 15 minutes. This one time, I was startled out of sleep by a passing crowd of my fellow students. Everyone was in a rush to make it in time before our strict teacher would start taking note of absences. I ran after the crowd, walking up the stairs to the right classroom, and sat at the only desk that was left for me. The teacher told us to open our books. The world froze, and suddenly the situation sort of reset. I was back in the hallway and blinking sleep out of my eyes because I'd been awoken by passing students. I thought it was just some funny coincidence, some kind of brain fart. I went up the stairs after the others and then sat at the same empty desk. The teachers told us to open our books and again, reset. The same 2 or so minutes. Wake up the noise, go up the stairs after others, sit at the same desk, teachers tell class to open books, and replayed again. For the first few loops, while it was still more interesting than terrifying, I had so many questions. Was I having an intense nightmare? Was I going insane? I was and am atheist with zero belief in anything paranormal, so no options other than this isn't real didn't cross my mind. Some loops later, I started doing all of those things that I'd read about online to see if it was a dream. You know, reading signs, trying to put my hand through a wall while looking away, that kind of stuff. Everything seemed as real as reality to me. My theories and contemplations got more outlandish. If there was some sort of complex temporal situation going on and the loop would continue indefinitely, would I eventually die of hunger? At the same time, I tried to mess around with the loop to see if something would happen. Deviating from the route did nothing. I tried staying in the hallway or going outside, but after the 2 or so minutes, I was always back in the hallway, regardless of my actions. I tried to engage other students and teachers, but everyone seemed preoccupied with their own task. If I managed to get someone to talk to me, they were always irritated with whatever I did that deviated from the loop. You shouldn't skip class, or the teacher's going to be mad if we're late. The same default responses, same tones over and over. I even tried injuring myself with scissors, an incredibly ill-advised move, I know, but at that stage, I was basically out of my mind with fear. Luckily, it only resulted in the loop resetting faster. I honestly don't know how many repeats of the loop I experienced, because I soon stopped counting. As I was getting more and more scared, I stopped wondering about the inexplicable hows and whys. As far as I could tell, the situation could not be explained, at least by me, and I was the only variable in the loop, so I became obsessed with the idea that perhaps a certain behavior was required or expected of me. But in those scenarios, there was usually some sort of event that had to be either prevented or instigated. In my case, there was nothing. My self-imposed goal became to stop acting like I was aware of the loop, so I tried to replicate my behavior from the first loop down to the finest detail to my best recollection. It changed nothing, but I latched onto the idea of perfecting this routine because I had nothing else. Loop after loop after loop of the same thing. They all blur together in my memory. When you're scared of a fate potentially worse than death, it's incredibly easy to stop asking questions and just function on autopilot. The thing is, I'd have written the whole thing off as a dream if not for the very last loop. By then, I'd completely accepted my fate in some sort of limbo when the loop no longer reset. My teacher told the class to open our books, and where I'd usually woken up, in the hallway again, the world hung, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. Time seemed to pause for less than a second, just like you might experience in a game when you quick save, and then the teacher went on with the lesson of the day. And life went on. I grew up in the Arctic. In the town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was an extremely normal occurrence to see all sorts of strange lights move across the sky. Keep in mind that winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amounts of time being spent under the stars. It's quite beautiful as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down, and just lay in the snow, looking up at the majesty of it all. The only thing disturbing the silence being the occasional breeze. The northern lights are also a common occurrence. Doesn't happen every day, but often enough that they start to get ignored after a while, as long as they aren't too spectacular anyway. On one particular night, without asking my parents, it was their snowmobile, I decided to go out on one of my midnight drives out of town. I drove a few kilometers over the hill to find a spot devoid of light pollution from town, shut off the machine, and settled into a good spot to look up and be retrospective. It wasn't all that interesting a scene. A few satellites passed by here and there, some relatively boring activity from the magnetic field, etc. And then I started noticing a clicking noise. At first I thought it was the sound of the snow machine cooling down as engines expand and contracts a lot in the cold. But the source of the sound definitely wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was that there must be an animal nearby, in which case I needed to get out of there fast. You don't really want to mess with a wild animal. But the clicking was far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was fairly mechanical sounding, and again, the source of the sound isn't coming from anywhere around me laterally. It was coming from up. So, naturally, I look up, determined to ascertain the origin of this strange noise. I see what I always see. Stars, northern lights, a lazy satellite coming across the sky. All normal stuff. But before I dismiss it altogether and begin heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora borealis. There were 3 rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking they were oddly symmetrical stars, but this proved false. They were definitely getting brighter. I kept staring in morbid fascination as they grew stronger and stronger, yet still only remaining single points in the sky. All the while, the clicking noise is getting louder and louder, more pronounced, almost like starting with tapping a pin on a desk to clacking billiard balls together inside my head. And then it stops. The lights are gone, the clicking is not heard, and aside from being a little stiff, cold, and rather petrified, I'm fine. So I jump back on the snowmobile, thinking maybe I'm going crazy. The machine takes a little longer than usual to start up, and I'm beginning to worry, but soon it's running and I'm heading back to town. As I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios as to what occurred are running through my head. I'm thinking it could have been a helicopter from the mine, or some strange northern lights behavior, etc. Probably not that big of a deal. I pull up to my house. Lights are all dark. Strange, as it wasn't that late when I left. I open the outer doors as quietly as possible, remove the winter gear, and enter the inner door. The house is quiet. Really quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late marking or watching TV. All I'm thinking is I have to get to bed without anyone noticing. Proves to be easy as I'm soon under my covers. I set an alarm for the next day, and all of a sudden everything makes sense. The engine was hard to start, I was stiff, rather chilly, nobody up when I was gone what felt like a relatively short period of time. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left, and now it was creeping up on 6 a.m. I stood, staring at clicking lights for almost 7 hours. I never ended up sleeping that night and didn't go on late night snow machine rides anymore. As a teenager back on a balmy August in 1986, I lived by a cemetery called Rose Hill. This is a very beautiful cemetery and much smaller back then. The land near the east end was prairie back in 1986. Our house was directly across from the last northeast gate. Here's my old house, and if you spin it around, you'll see the old last gate. My house was the one in disrepair. A ton of things went on there. But that is for another day. With my parents out of town, my friends started staying over. My buddy and I decided to go get my girlfriend and head over to South Hill Ball Diamond. We walked through the cemetery and it was uneventful. We reached my girlfriend and the 3 of us headed back to the ballpark. South Hill Ball Complex and ex-girlfriend's house on the same 2-block area. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we got to the ballpark. We had a blast at the park. The park once had this huge swing situated in a dome shape. Makes for some awesome night swinging under the stars. After about an hour, a storm was rolling in from the southeast. We walked to my girlfriend to her house and headed back to my house. My buddy was complaining about going the long way because the storm was full of lightning and approaching fast. The wind was picking up greatly. He wanted to go back that way. He wanted to go the back way, which is the way we came and is the short route, which means you go through the park, go behind a large apartment building. This road is 3rd Street, and the truck is next to the cemetery, and the trees obscure the apartment building. As a note, the maps did not want to show the apartment. We also would likely go through the now closed and locked cemetery. When we got to the apartment building, my buddy suddenly stopped. He said, "I left my glasses at the park. Stay here and I'll run back and grab it." My buddy was a cross-country runner. I waited, pacing back and forth at the back corner of the apartment building, as my buddy was heading back and being loud and immature. I noticed a man walking up the front sidewalk to the apartment. He was wearing a Michael Myers mask and a dark blue coveralls, brandishing a machete on his side. And he paused, staring up at the top center apartment. I looked up at the apartment and saw through a window a college-aged female was walking back and forth. Then through another hallway window just outside of this gal's apartment, I saw the masked dude slamming on the female's apartment door. My buddy ran up and said, "What was that scream?" I only heard the mic clone banging and thundering in my own heartbeat. I pointed up. My buddy had seen the masked dude in the female's apartment. We could not see the female at that point. The masked man was looking down at us and the apartment light went out. We see the masked man go by the hallway window, leaving her apartment. We ran. It was now raining heavy with lightning and thunder. We hopped the back cemetery fence. A couple of times I looked to my right to see my buddy running alongside of me as we dodged headstones. Then he screamed. I looked back and at first did not see him. I slowed my pace in a panic as he jumped out of an open grave. He yelped like Goofy and his feet were running in midair. I was at least 100 yards ahead of him. I began to run in total panic. My buddy poured on the juice, passing me very quickly. He literally jumped over the graveyard gate across from the front of my house. It took me a bit longer. We made it into the house when we turned off the lights. With towels to dry ourselves, we spent a great deal of time peeking out the window between the curtains. Then it happened. A 70s S model station wagon pulled into my driveway and stopped. We were shitting ourselves. We could not make out the lone person situated in the driver's seat of the car. Just a silhouette. Suddenly it backed out and went out the way it came. We ran outside, staying low in my yard. It turned and went back to the apartment building. Michael Myers clone? Let's not meet.
When I was younger, most likely 6 or 7 years old, I can distinctly remember playing with a few of the older children in my neighborhood, doing things like drawing with chalk and playing tag, simple games that we played in our cul-de-sac. The little boy and girl I played with I can still remember in detail. The boy's name was Randy, and the girl we called Lily. Randy was light-skinned and had dark hair, while Lily had bright red hair and darker skin. I was dark-skinned and dark-haired. Physical attributes aside, both of them were very boisterous, and we all loved to run around and play until the sun set, and my mom called me in, and then the both of them would run back to their houses until the next time we were out to play. It was a sweet little friendship, and it was pretty normal, except for a few things. When we would draw with chalk, both Randy and Lily's favorite things to draw were these little symbols with random words after them. I now realize that those symbols were very close to some symbols I'd seen, but for the life of me could not remember where, and I can remember some of the words they wrote having to do with terms that I still do not recognize. My mom would come outside with juice boxes sometimes while we were drawing, and laugh at my friend's cute made-up language, as she called it. One morning, I went out to play with my friends, only to find them sitting on the curb, sulking. When I asked them why they were sad, they simply told me that they had to leave because, and I quote, "We've got to go back to 2137. I asked where that was, and they said it was later. They told me to sit right there and wait a minute so they could bring me something to remember them by. I did what they told me, and soon enough they had returned, bearing what I've chalked up to one of the strangest gifts I've been given to date. They were a little rainbow hairbrush that sparkled, a small unmarked tube of what I was informed was lotion, and a small box that looked like it was carved out of a gem. They handed me my gifts, which I promptly tried out, brushing my hair and using some of the lotion on my wrist so they knew I wasn't going to just throw them aside, and hugged me before running back to their respective homes. My memory cuts out at this point, but the next thing I remember is waking up, sleepily rubbing my pale-skinned hand across my face to brush away my bright red hair, and going to ask my mom if Randy and Lily had left. My mother had no idea who I was talking about. Our neighbors had no children. She did not remember me being born with dark skin and dark hair. No one did. That was the day that Randy and Lily disappeared from the face of the earth, leaving me with an unfamiliar new appearance, a tube of hand lotion, and a tiny comb, and a glittery little box that sits on my mantle this day, which I still have no idea how to open. It was early 2000s. It is 3 a.m. and my house phone starts ringing. The phone was on the other side of the room. I stand up on the bed and start heading over for the low dresser to answer it. And my wife gets up to get the phone as well. By this time, it's the third ring, and I remember thinking, crap, it's going to go to voicemail. The ringing stops. Then my cell phone starts ringing. I immediately change gears to someone really needs to get a hold of me. I grab my phone. Caller ID is 000000000. I answer. Hello? A voice comes through the line as though it was a distant overseas call, parting through the static and asking, "Is this Joel?" To which I reply, "Yes, who's this?" Immediately, it was as though those words, "Is this Joel?" were being pulled back through the line, echoing in reverse. There was static, and then the call dropped. Jump forward several years. I'm installing a phone system that we're joking around is so advanced that we could place calls back in time. I punch in my old phone number and call it, realizing that the number is still active and my wife might answer. I hang up and call my now years-old retired phone number. Somebody answers. I freak out and ask, "Is this Joel?" The voice on the other end of the line answers through space and time. "Yes, who's this?" At that instant, I immediately remember taking that call, and I'm struck dumb. I cannot speak. Without thinking, I reflexively press the hang up button. I am now freaked out. I look over to my colleague who isn't as freaked out as I am. From his perspective, I called the number and someone with the same name answered. But he realized that was my voice on the other end of the line. I told him, I got that call. It was 5 years ago, but I got that call. Then we both freak out. I redial and get a message that the number is no longer in service. I call my home number and my wife answers. I tell her I'm testing a phone system and ask if she's had any previous calls. Nope, none. I'm kind of freaking out, but with her on speakerphone, I ask her, "Hey, do you remember that 3 a.m. call we got those years back?" "Yes." "Where I was asked, 'Is this Joel?' and then the line went dead?" "Yeah." I'm now just looking at my colleague with my wife still on speakerphone. "Do you remember what year that was?" It was way before we had kids, so it had to have been in the 2002 time frame. I don't know how to say this, but I'm pretty sure that was me that called.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Of course, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Mr. Davis for his help in this video, which, if you enjoyed, you should definitely go check him out. He is a lovely guy and a great narrator, so go show him some love. Drop a comment in the comment section with a suggestion for tomorrow's video. The highest liked comment within 12 hours will get made into a reality, so get suggesting. And if you'd like some shiny new clothes, please don't forget to check out my merch store. Remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment. It's a really great way to help support the channel, and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon. you'll be able to find a link in the description, as well as the links to my social media. And if you'd like your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.